so much for inviting me to your book club. I'm Christina Young, the librarian at Camden Rockport Middle School, and I'm delighted to be speaking to you today about books for adults, although I did sneak in a YA book that I think will interest you. The genres of the books that I'll be presenting today include science fiction, autobiography, horror, poetic narrative, realistic fiction, and biography. Let's start with the science fiction, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. It begins as giant robot sculptures mysteriously appear overnight all over the world. Our 23-year-old social media obsessed protagonist, April May, is walking home in the middle of the night from her job at a startup, and she comes across one of these giant sculptures. Thinking it's an art installation, she immediately enlists the help of her friend Jason, who records a video of April that goes viral, as people begin to understand that the robot sculpture, who April May jokingly called Carl, may actually be first contact with an alien civilization. April May is at the center of the story, both investigating the mystery and trying to deal with her newfound global fame. The style of the narration is very casual, if not confessional. It has the air of someone telling you something that they've already lived through as they reflect upon it. This creates a little bit of distance between April, the event she has lived through, and her emotions, but it's an amazing read. It's part coming-of-age story, part mystery. In An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, April May defines her identity publicly in the midst of this worldwide first contact event. Mistakes are made, and like most good science fiction, in An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, it reflects our culture back to us with new eyes. April defines and rises through these tiers of fame, from popularity to new divinity, and learns the power dynamics and dangers at each tier. The mystery of the Carl serves as an interesting backdrop, but for me, April May is the kind of flawed yet evolving character that you root for even as you cringe at her mistakes. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing is the first in a planned series and a great summer read. Next is Becoming by Michelle Obama. Reading Becoming by Michelle Obama is like gaining a friend. It's like that conversation on the porch that you have with your female friends about childhood, work, raising a family, and occasionally deferring your dreams to watch your partner shine. The descriptions of her early married life, working full-time with young children, may hit home for a lot of you. One thing about this autobiography is that instead of merely telling you what happens in this period of history that we all pretty recently lived through, Michelle Obama reveals how it felt to be there in person. Here's how she describes a moment during the Obama's first G20 summit, a trip to Europe, after a tiring reception of meeting world leaders and their spouses, when she realized that Queen Elizabeth is at her elbow, smiling up at her. "You're so tall," she remarked, cocking her head. "Well," I said, chuckling, "the shoes give me a couple of inches, but yes, I am tall." The Queen then glanced down at the pair of Jimmy Choos I was wearing. She shook her head. "These shoes are unpleasant, are they not?" she said. She gestured with some frustration at her own pumps. I confessed then to the Queen that my feet were hurting. She confessed that hers hurt too. We looked at each other then with identical expressions of, when is all this standing around with world leaders finally going to wrap up? And with this, she busted out with a fully charming laugh. Forget that sometimes she wore a diamond crown and that I had flown to London on the presidential jet. We were just two tired ladies oppressed by our shoes. I then did what is instinctive to me anytime I feel connected to a new person, which is to express my feelings outwardly, and I laid a hand affectionately across her shoulder. I couldn't have known at the moment, but I was committing what would be deemed an epic faux pas. I'd touched Queen of England, which I soon learned was apparently not done. Reflecting on the ensuing scandal in the British press, Obama continues, "I try not to let the criticism rattle me. Even if I hadn't done the proper thing at Buckingham Palace, at least I had done the human thing. I dare say that the Queen was okay with it too, because when I touched her, she only pulled closer, resting a gloved hand lightly on the small of my back." Doing the human thing is what Becoming is all about. Our next book is a complete switch of gears from Becoming. We're going from inspirational to the terrifying. The Institute by our main neighbor, Stephen King. Luke Ellis awoke confused in a room that looked just like his own. It couldn't be his own because his room had a window and this room did not. And his room was in his house in suburban Minneapolis, and this one was not. But last night, at least he thinks it was last night, his parents were murdered, and he was brought here to the room without a window. He wasn't sure where here was, but it sure wasn't home. Luke is a genius, not a smart kid, an actual genius. At 12 years old, he's about to study at 2 universities simultaneously. Well, or at least he was. And Luke has a secret. When he gets upset, weird things happen. Nothing major, but things move around, like last night at dinner when the pizza pan went skittering across the table. Luke doesn't know it yet, but he's here in Maine, deep in the woods of Maine, at the Institute. The Institute is for special children like Luke, not geniuses, but telepaths and telekinetics, who came to the Institute the same way Luke did. Luke, Kalisha, Nick, George, Iris, Avery are in the front half, undergoing experiments to earn vending machine tokens, where failure to comply brings swift and horrible punishments at the hands of Mrs. Sigsbee, the director of the Institute, and her staff. What's in the back half? The kids don't know, but what they do know is that once kids go back there, they're never seen again. From Carrie to The Shining, Firestarter, and It, Stephen King writes resourceful, smart, resilient children so realistically. They're not little adults. These are children that think like children. And the Institute has mystery, a shadowy government operation, betrayals, and at its heart, some very resourceful children. Speaking of children, now for the young adult book that I promised you, and that is The Poet X. The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo as 15-year-old high school sophomore Xiomara Batista, who lives with her highly religious Dominican mother, laconic Dominican father, and seemingly perfect twin brother Javier in Harlem. Xiomara and her twin have questions and secrets that threaten the values of their family. Her emotional outlet is her poetry journal, where she secretly writes in her notebook, and her English teacher, Mrs. Galliano, has invited her to join a spoken word poetry club. Though scared, she decides to join until she finds out it's at the same time as the confirmation class that her religious mother requires of her. In Xiomara's poetry, she expresses her thoughts about her maturing body, questions her Catholic faith and the existence of God, and also comes to terms with her awakening sexuality. Xiomara also begins to have romantic feelings for Aman, her biology lab partner, and since this is forbidden by her repressive mother, she must keep her growing love for Aman a secret. In her poetry, Xiomara is free to challenge her mother in a way that she never dares to in person. At times, The Poet X isn't so much a coming-of-age novel as an explosion of Xiomara's emotions. She's a young woman who has a lot to say about what it means to be a first-generation American, what it means to be a curvaceous young woman in a male-dominated world, and what it means to question one's faith. Xiomara dare not say any of it within earshot of her deeply religious mother, but she has her poetry journal. In this poem, readers hear Xiomara lamenting Jesus as the friend she has outgrown. This year, Mommy has filled out the forms and signed me up and marched me to the church before I can tell her that Jesus feels like a friend I've had my whole childhood who has suddenly become brand new, who invites himself over too often, who texts me too much. A friend I just don't think I need anymore. I know, even writing that is blasphemous. But I don't know how to tell Mommy that this year it's not about feeling unready. It's about knowing that this doubt has already been confirmed. The injustices in Xiomara's life, illuminated by the fierceness of Acevedo's poetry, should resonate with anyone who feels like they have no voice, yet so much to say. Our next book is also about a woman finding her voice. This is a realistic fiction novel, Sugarland by Tammy Lee Stoner, and it's told non-linearly with flashbacks and flash forwards. Teenage girls Dara and Rhodey fall in love in 1923 in Midland, Texas, and Dara spends the rest of her life hiding out from and coming to terms with the consequences of their forbidden love. Once caught by Rhodey's mother, shamed by the town's preacher, and inadvertently terrified by her cousin, Sheriff Earl, Dara leaves home and sets off to work as a cook and the only female at Imperial State Prison Farm. There she endures a hostile and violent head cook. In her decade at the prison, she questions what it means to be different and draws parallels between her life as a closeted gay woman and the lives of the black prisoners. One of the prisoners, Huddy, is a fictionalized version of blues musician Leadbelly. Their unlikely friendship and her friendship with her co-worker Beauregard provide solace in the gritty prison. Tammy Lynn Stoner deftly writes powerlessness. The reader feels the lack of Dara's empowerment, being a young female and her family, compounded by the hopelessness and self-hatred of having feelings for her friend. But the skill of her writing is such that it never drags the readers into hopelessness, even at times when Dara seems to lose hope herself. Stoner also uses the concept of punishment and getting what one deserves in both the negative and positive connotations, sort of as mirror images of one another. At the sheriff's station, after she overhears her cousin Earl, the sheriff, casually brag about sexually assaulting perverts and giving them the what for, Dara sets the boundaries for her own behavior in public. I heard the jail door open and I looked up. The women weren't in shackles. I thought they might be. Earl easily walked them out. They kept their heads down in single file, a line of women heading for the firing squad. 3 wore dresses, which had no doubt been nice before. One even had a flower pinned to hers, which, though it was all now torn petals. The 4th woman wore a suit, the kind of suit you see Hollywood types wearing, and I wondered if she was from out of town. The suit had no doubt been what raised the flag. The shortest one, the prettiest one, lifted her eyes to mine. She had a slightly bruised ring around her neck as if she'd been choked, and I wondered if Earl had done that to her, my own cousin. Her eyes were red and the bags under them as deep and dark as a secret. I could see them outside the window through the chalky dust as they continued down the road. The one with the flower turned around to the woman in the suit and in a slight, very slight gesture with her hand to say, "We're all right." But the woman in the suit shook her head no and stopped right there in the middle of the road. The other 3 stared at her. Then without a notice, the woman in the suit sprinted off, running so fast you'd think someone was chasing her. And I suppose in her world, someone always was. Sugarland is at times beautiful, gritty, and has a narrator that I think you will really root for. Our final book today is a biography, which I think will fill you with courage and hope. It is Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. 47 days. Imagine 47 days. Would you be able to survive 47 days in the Pacific Ocean with nothing to eat except for raw fish, and maybe if you're extremely lucky, a passing bird? It's hard to imagine no fresh water, and yet this is only one part of the amazing true story of Louis Zamperini as told in Laura Hillenbrand's Unbroken. Louis Zamperini's fascinating life is as epic as Odysseus's. If this were not true and exhaustively verified, you wouldn't believe it. Zamperini was an Olympic athlete running in the 1936 Olympics and a World War II hero. But his story starts as a Torrance, California juvenile delinquent, at first stealing pies off windowsills and later into drinking and smoking as a young teenager. He was failing in school and fortunately put his running skills to better use when his older brother Pete introduced him to track as a way to meet girls. Zamperini became a world-renowned and record-breaking runner. In fact, he set the college record at USC for running the mile in 4 minutes and 8 seconds. In 1941, after college and on the cusp of the US joining World War II, he joined the Army Air Corps as a bombardier and crashed into the Pacific Ocean, where he survived for 47 days on a raft with 2 other men and really nothing to eat or drink besides what they could catch with their bare hands. When rescue finally came, it was by the Japanese rather than the Allies, and he survived 2 years enslaved at a Japanese prisoner of war punishment camp under the sadistic watch of the camp's leader, Watanabe. Like any bully, he had a taste for a particular type of victim. Officers were in for unrelenting cruelty. From the moment Watanabe locked eyes with Louis Zamperini, an officer, a famous Olympian, a man for whom defiance was second nature, no man obsessed him more. The astounding and inspirational story of Louis Zamperini is equal parts despair and hope, with a generous dose of humor. It moves quickly, and Hillenbrand finds the humanity in the damaged but ultimately unbroken spirit of Louis Zamperini, one of the greatest generation. I guess resilience is kind of an inadvertent theme in my book talk today. Resilience in the face of fame, resilience in the face of oppression. I hope that you'll find a book among these that speaks to you. I thank you so much for asking me to join you today.